honestly, just completely dismantle everything we think we know about the 19th century working class. When we picture the industrial era, we usually imagine this very specific type of person, right? The rugged, muscle-bound laborer, happily covered in soot, taking just immense pride in forging the backbone of the modern world. But today, we're actually going to look at historical texts from these very workers. And what they reveal is this fascinating hidden rebellion that completely flips that entire narrative on its head.
We're going to kick things off with a pretty surprising confession from a 19th century blacksmith named Gilland. Listen to this quote. It was written in 1841, and it immediately challenges what we expect from historical laborers. This is absolutely not the voice of a man who feels spiritually fulfilled by his anvil. This is the voice of someone looking at his life and realizing, hey, I am completely mismatched with the heavy, brutal work society expects me to do. And, as you'll see, Gilland was definitely not alone in feeling this way.
Section 1. The Myth of the Worker. Hero versus Reality. Now, to understand why Gilland's words were so radical for the time, we first need to understand the powerful, heavily romanticized image that society forced onto these workers. Painters back then absolutely loved depicting the smith as this noble citizen, forging swords to defend liberty and plowshares to feed the nation. But the reality was severe physical misery. Contemporary writers noted that the workers who actually served as models for these highly detailed paintings were often losing their eyesight at an early age, all because of the extreme strain of their labor. That heroic image was quite literally blinding them.
So the really crucial takeaway here is that workers were essentially trapped. They were acting as models for this epic, grand narrative of labor that they didn't actually want any part of. The quote-unquote manly poetry of their bronzed faces and robust limbs, that was a curse. It was just a fake, varnished reflection of their very real suffering. Imagine being celebrated in high art for the exact thing that is physically breaking your body down day after day. It created a really profound sense of alienation.
Section 2. The Painter's Dream Beyond the Canvas.
So that begs the question, if these men didn't want to be heroic ironworkers, what exactly did they want to do? Well, our blacksmith, Gilland, reveals the ultimate twist here. His dream was to actually cross over to the other side of the canvas. He writes about walking through the city, stopping to look at shops filled with pictures and engravings, and basically going into a state of sheer ecstasy. He didn't want to just be the subject of the painting anymore. He wanted to be the one holding the brush.
Rather than forging iron, these workers longed for the airy, kind of vagabond freedom and delicate artistry of a painter's life. Being a painter meant you got to be intoxicated with the sun, moving freely from luxurious mansions to cramped attics. But the absolute most profound point here is that last one, making woods that aren't there. The laborers desperately wanted to create things out of pure imagination. They were secretly in love with useless things, constantly seeking an escape from the endless, grinding cycle of producing strictly useful commodities.
Section 3. Stay in your place. Gatekeeping art.
But, as we're about to see, the establishment was absolutely terrified at the thought of workers putting down their hammers and picking up paintbrushes. The hypocrisy of the era is honestly shocking. On one side, you had the wealthy bourgeois moralists preaching that painting was this dangerous, vagabond lifestyle, urging workers to just stick to the countryside. But then, on the other side, the working-class editors actually ranked the trade of a painter right next to deadly jobs like cleaning cesspools. Yeah, no joke, they genuinely thought painting a landscape was as hazardous to your soul as raw sewage. So despite all their differences, everyone agreed on one thing: a worker must remain a worker.
And it wasn't just politicians or editors, even the great literary giants of the time bought into this gatekeeping. The acclaimed author Victor Hugo offered this incredibly patronizing piece of advice to a young worker who had written some poetry. He essentially patted the guy on the head and said, "Great job, carry on, but always be what you are, a worker." The establishment loved the idea of a worker writing poetry, sure, but only as long as he didn't actually quit his day job or try to climb the social ladder.
But the workers, they weren't having it. A worker tailor claps back with this totally biting response, pointing out that physical exhaustion makes doing both entirely impossible. He calls out Hugo's hypocrisy directly, noting that since half the world gets to live in idleness, the worker is already doing the work of two people.
You simply cannot endure a bone-crushing, grueling workday and then somehow have the energy left over to be a brilliant poet. The whole system was essentially rigged to keep them too tired to think.
Section 4. Stealing the Night, a Hidden Rebellion.
So if they couldn't be artists during the day, these workers had to find another way. And to them, the night wasn't just a time for resting. It became a stolen kingdom of intellectual rebellion. The elite class believed that Providence had designed the night simply for the worker to experience a brutalizing sleep so they could wake up and just work all over again. But these workers completely refused to give up their minds. They actively chose sleep deprivation over intellectual starvation.
If we trace their daily routine, it reveals exactly how they managed to carve out these secret intellectual lives right in the margins of their own exhaustion. The day, total constraint. The evening is just for eating and recovering. But the night? That is when they stole hours to read literature, write poetry, and debate philosophy. And on Sundays, they engaged in these deep metaphysical chats. The source actually describes these Sunday conversations as moments where the earth seemed to sink away because they were literally creating entirely new worlds in their minds. They realized pretty quickly that they needed the luxury of philosophy and poetry just as much as they needed better wages. It wasn't just about the money for them. They craved what they called the secret chagrin of the wealthy. They wanted the right to feel existential dread, the right to read sweeping romantic literature, the right to just ponder the universe. Why? Because cultivating those noble passions was really the only way to stand tall against an industrial machine that was ready to devour them and reduce them to mere animals of labor.
Section 5. The Real Gate of Hell. Choosing Fatigue.
And this brings us to the really profound philosophical conclusion of our explainer today. We've seen their struggles, we've seen their dreams, but we really have to ask ourselves, what was the true source of their suffering? Was it just the heavy hammer? Was it just the blistering heat of the furnace?
Well, the ultimate tragedy wasn't actually the hard labor itself, but being completely denied the fundamental human right to choose what to create. As the text argues, true poverty isn't physical fatigue. It is the sheer impossibility of choosing your own fatigue. It's having your destiny locked into place the exact moment you are born, with society constantly telling you that your only value lies in the strength of your arms and never in the depth of your mind. I want to leave you with this really provocative thought from a 19th century joiner named Ghani. He actually calls out the great poet Dante, telling him that his famous Inferno is absolutely nothing compared to reality. He asks, is a life without art and poetry the truest hell of all? It's a really powerful question, one that echoes from the 19th century workshop all the way to how we view work, creativity, and human dignity today.